Hello and welcome to Elvenhome, and to this week's edition, which concentrates very much on some good old-fashioned scenic work at the end of the layout just below Grey Havens, and also a brief look at the speakers that I am using for the soundscape, which we looked at in the last video. So let's take you to a scene of desolation a few days ago. Well, this scene of desolation is something you don't normally see. I've taken Grey Havens off the layout. It's sitting at the other end. And I've removed the engine shed, the depot, because what we're going to do is get in here and do the scenic work that I want to do along here, which is the area between where the rock face comes round and the end of Bagshot Row and the depot. I want to put something which I think is going to be a wall, but I'm making my mind up, to complete the end of this road, which was always intended to be done. And then what else am I going to do? Nope, that is it, I think. And that will complete this end of the layout then. Oh yes, I know. I'm also going to put some walling in here in the same way as you see over the other side, just so that as you look in through the tunnel mouth, you don't just see a void. And this track here needs to be ballasted in probably to about here, because you can't see much beyond there, just to complete the view that it's going in. I'm not going to ballast it all the way around because there's frankly no need. The Grey Havens is currently sitting, if I just take you gently up the layout, stand you up a bit so I can, there we go. Grey Havens is just happily sitting at this end of the layout, and I've started tentatively trying to do some bright dry brushing on the face of the rocks to begin to give a bit more definition. I want it to be that kind of brown colour, because you can get rock faces that are that colour. It needs a bit more work, but actually handily, Grey Havens is sitting on the battens that held what was High Elven, and that's actually a rather good place for me to come along and do a bit more work on that rock face to get it looking a bit better. The aim will be for the edge of that rock face at the bottom to nestle down into the underbrush and rest that I'm going to be putting down onto the layout at the other end. So that's the work for the next couple of days, I think, and we'll see how we get on as the video goes on. bit of a change at this end of the layout. I had originally intended to put a wall in here, which I thought was going to be very straightforward, and then get on with the scenic work. I built the basis of the wall and put it in place, and I thought, well, that looks okay. It's a very long wall, but it probably looks okay. My wife came in and had a look at it and said what I knew to be the case was, isn't it a shame you don't have more of the iron railings to be able to put that at the end rather than have the wall? So I had to go back and rebuild this part, which also meant desperately trying to remember how I made the colour, what I mixed together to create the colour for the capping stones. But this is now on the layout. If I just, excuse me a moment, let's try and get a grip. There we go. If I just take this off, it's not stuck in yet. And it's simply some of the tubing, strip styrene tubing, you can see it underneath, with texture paper on top, some channel on top into which are cut lines to give the idea of capping stones, and then scale model scenery, 6-foot wrought iron fencing put into the top. That will be put into position there, and I think it does look so much better than the wall that was going to be there. So what I'm going to do is I'll get that stuck in. We're away out doing other things today, but hopefully tomorrow, once it's dried and in place, I'll be able to move on and start doing the scenic work. You'll see the tape is to roughly mark out where the scenic work will come up to, because roughly where that line is where the line of the rock face comes down. I completed the ballasting of the lines just inside, so that's all done. That's been drying for a day or two now, so that's pretty much finished. One other thing while I'm here, oh, pardon me, I don't know what happened there. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure quite what happened. Everything went a bit sort of skew-whiff. However, the point that I was going to make before I was so rudely interrupted is that what's quite useful is seeing something down the end here. I mean, plainly, Grey Havens is not going to move down to this end of the layout. That just wouldn't make any sense. But it is quite useful to see something perched at this end which is more complete, and to give me a better idea about roughly where, how much I want to have covered in down this area, because the depth of the churchyard is a bit deeper perhaps than I would need with High Elven as it currently is, as the track plan is laid out. But it is just useful to see something down this end to start helping me get my mind around what's going to happen at High Elven, which is still far from certain. So I'll get on with the scenic work in the next day or two, and when you come back I will have started doing that work. Well, you can see here that the Grey Havens is back in its place, as is the engine shed, and what looks like a wonderfully manicured lawn is sitting below the rock face. It occurred to me at this point, when I was doing the editing, that I completely forgot, whilst I was rabbiting on here, to tell you how it was that I came by what looks like a beautifully manicured lawn. It wasn't my intention. The first thing that I did was to put out the rectangle that you can see of stone, which will be the base for the water tower. And then around that I put a layer of 1mm patchy grass, remembering that's 6 inches in real money. Over the top of that I then put a layer of a mix of 2mm patchy and summer grass. This is all pico grasses. And then on top of that layer I put in various places some 4mm dead grass before going over the whole thing with some 4mm patchy grass. Now all that grass is there and is standing up, and you'll understand when I come on to talk about the depths of the grass why I say it looks like a lawn, when in fact all the grass is really quite tall for grass. But I thought I would at least tell you how it was that I got to this result before I go on to discuss what I think of it. So I'll now return you to me rabbiting on. It's interesting when one thinks about scale and static grass. The grass that's there is 2mm and 4mm grass that you can see, which in N-gauge, roughly, is sort of 1 foot and 2 foot high grass. But it looks wonderfully manicured. However, I've put High Elven Grey Havens back in place because what's now going to happen is all the bush and the briar and everything's going to go in. But it's got to go in to allow Grey Havens to be able to come off. So it was easier to do all that work hiding the join and also being able to make sure I position things as I want them to do. What I'm going to be doing over the next little while is putting in the rubberized horsehair, which I've used before, to provide some briars, underbrush, some of the lump foliage. I may even, I think, get a few of the seafoam small trees and put them in there. Well, this area is accessible, and I don't think it would have been allowed to completely overgrow, but it wouldn't be regularly tended. I did have an idea of having it as the railwayman's allotments, but no, I don't think that would happen either. So I'll come back. I think what I'll do is I'll put a camera up just to show the area while I'm working, and we'll see what footage we can get from that. So speak to you again when all the work has been done. In this brief section, what I'm just briefly going to do is talk about the things you see in front of you, which are the stereo speakers that I bought to be able to play the soundscape through that I was showing you in the last video. You may recall that when I said I wanted to do the soundscape, one of the things that drove me in that direction was not wanting to use the sound modules which are about, because generally speaking I found that they were a bit limiting. They would have 3 or 4 sounds on them, which as far as I could see you would play sort of separately. I can well see that if you want a particular sound, you just want church bells, for example, coming out of your church, they would work really well. But I was looking for a more complete soundscape, and the first version of the soundscape, I hadn't thought too much about positioning the sounds within the stereo field so that they matched where things were on the layout. And following a number of people mentioning that, I hit upon the idea of having some wireless speakers. These are both Bluetooth and wireless speakers. In fact, they're sold individually, and they will work perfectly well as a kind of portable speaker. They're rechargeable. But if you buy 2 of them, you can pair them together using Bluetooth, and then pair the pair of them to a sound source, namely my iMac, and then they act as a pair of stereo speakers. So what I do is position them under the layout, one at each end of the longest part of the layout, and using the stereo field within the tracks that have been produced, I'm able to hear things in the right part of the layout. A number of people mentioned the possibility of having individual speakers and driving the individual soundtracks to particular speakers, and I think you certainly could do that. I think you would need to get yourself a multi-channel amplifier, because each speaker would need to be driven from one channel, and you would also therefore need something capable of playing the 6 or 7 soundtracks that I'm using here on separate channels to drive to each speaker, which is getting a bit more complicated than I would want to do. But it would certainly be possible, although you are getting closer back to the kind of individual sound modules that I was trying to move away from. The other point is that the whole length of my layout, although it's quite long, is not so long that the stereo field is inadequate for being able to position sounds either towards the left or to the right, or in the case excuse me, of the children playing and the church bells, to the extreme left and right of the sound field. But I have to say, these are jolly good things. Cost me about 35 quid each, I think, something like that, maybe a bit more. And they really are cracking speakers, I have to say. So not only do I have the soundscape coming out of some nice speakers, but I also have a rather good new set of speakers for my iMac. So all's well that ends well. So with that, let's get on and see the next stage in the work of doing the scenic work at the foot of the cliff. This whole section, which I won't talk completely over, is just showing you me doing this work. It's the 20 or so minutes it took to complete this, but take with all the downtime cut out and then running at twice the speed. And you'll see it's the usual thing that I do with clump foliage, the rubberized horsehair with the foliage on it that gives the look of the briars, and then mixing together different tones and colours of underbrush and clump foliage to give a variety of colour in the eventual scenic scene. At this point, I just missed, much like doing ballasting really, and then put a 50-50 mixture of PVA and water just to hold that stone down, which will be the base for the water tower. And then you'll see me do the same thing across all the foliage to help all the clump foliage and the underbrush bind together and hold. Well, from this lofty perch, you can see the completed work at the back of the engine shed. After the section you've just seen, I realised that I'd not finished to the far corner here, down here. So I think you can probably see that has now been completed. Some bush and stuff has gone in there just to hide the where Greyhaven's rock face comes down. And Greyhaven's rock face will be capable of being removed from there without causing too much mayhem in the event that I have to get underneath. It was surprising, actually. This didn't take quite as long to complete as I thought it might. But I'm rather pleased with the outcome. It's all settling down nicely after I put the glue on it, and the patchy grass is showing through in places that was put underneath. As I said, it is interesting with static grass that, particularly at N-gauge, I think it's quite difficult to get the depth right and make it look right enough, because I did think about buying some 6mm grass so that the grass would look longer, but that's really rather big grass. I mean, it's pretty serious stuff, that. So I'm pleased with the outcome. It will bed in quite nicely, and there's enough briar and hedge and goodness knows what else that's grown up over time. So that's completed, that end of the layout. Well, for the time being, until I think of something else to do, of course. And that really pretty much brings this edition of Elvenhome to a close. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, well, please do subscribe. It'd be great to have you along. And hit the bell notification so you know when I'm uploading videos. If you've got any comments, then please do let me have your comments. I should be interested to see what you've got to say. And until I speak to you again in about a fortnight's time, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.